Max Gaw, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell from the Hawthorn Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well. Look, it's been a couple of weeks since we've been able to be with you. A combination of some holidays, some sickness, maybe just the fact that it's the end of your fantasy footy season. But regardless, the fact is there are 18 games left of football to go in your 2022 fantasy season. It's crazy when you put it down like that, hey? But the good news is still got plenty we want to get through with you in this episode to help you with the unique dilemmas you find yourself heading into round 22. Joining us on this episode, as he has a bunch of times right throughout 2022, Kane, hello, buddy. How are you, man?
Very well, MJ. Yeah, it's nearly over. Another season in the books. It goes so fast.
Super fast. The good news is, especially for our Patreons, which you can join our Patreon supporter group for just a couple of bucks a month at coachespanel.tv. The year isn't over for you because there is a ton of stuff coming. Louis, who you may hear him occasionally on the pod, he's a regular here at the Coaches Panel. It's got a heap of stuff that you'll be able to hear for our Patreons, as well as for just regular streamers and listeners to the podcast. You'll get Kane and I are going to get to work shortly on our top 50 keeper prospects. We're bringing those podcasts back for you again, as then it's all the review of all the trades analysis that is going to come, all the off-season moves. We will keep you covered with that. And then, of course, it'll be prices and positions dropping in mid to late December. And all of a sudden, we go round the mountain yet again for 2023 fantasy footy. All right, Kane, let's talk about the big issues for teams this week. But I think we need to almost face it format by format. At time of recording now, the information could become null and void by the time people are listening to this based on the Patrick Cripps deliberations. It's been close to, I think, something like 3 hours they're deliberating the decision. So again, we might have some real-time information for you, but at time of recording, he's suspended. He's out for 2 weeks. Braydon Preuss, I know a lot of people moved, maybe not a lot, a number of people moved to him looking for a value ruck a few weeks ago. You've then also got some guys that we've streamed through for the couple of weeks have got themselves injured, like a Toby Green was an option people looked at a couple of weeks ago. And then Geelong have done a rest already in management with Mitch, Duncan. Now, in and of themselves, they might be all big names, but them out probably means in the limited trade formats, Kane, you're forced to make a trade there rather than potentially looking to get aggressive and avoid tags or play some fixture matchups.
Yeah, exactly right, MJ. And again, we've got 2 weeks to go. So unless, you're probably at 0 trades by now, really, in limited trade formats.
One, maybe two, surely not more than that.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. So again, maybe you can rely on some bench cover. Maybe this is your final move just to keep as many points on field and you've been waiting for something like this. None of them are really super popular players. They're all...
Well, Cripps would be, but...
Yeah, Cripps would be. He would be. He'd be the one that would be most popular, especially with the way he started the season. And, he has come back to form a little bit. So maybe when people were thinking about a luxury upgrade, those big scores came their way. But yeah, it's painful. I think in AFL fantasy, it's going to be, a lot of people will have probably one of these. Not many will have none. And clearly, if you do have none, you can start looking at some of these tags that look like they're almost everywhere, or some of these positional switches that maybe you might want to move to safer areas. But I think a lot of people will be starting with, the unfortunate thing we always say with a Preuss in that price range is there's not many ways to go. Now, you might have a Marshall, an English, a Darcy Cameron already in your forward line. Maybe that makes things a little bit easier because you're playing with the forwards. But this is really tricky, MJ. This is real daily fantasy sort of decisions now.
I think that's exactly the way to look at it, isn't it? Is where traditional, and not just traditional, but salary cap coaches are constantly playing the long game, the long game, the long game. It's this time of season that daily fantasy and draft coaches who are used to waiver wires and watching the matchups really come alive. So before we do look at some of the matchups and the combinations, I think it's pretty much reading between the lines with what you're saying. if in the limited trade formats, you have the luxury of a trade, if you can use some loopholes before, absolutely maximize those. But pull the trigger now. Don't wait another week, because you could almost guarantee there's going to be compounding issues next week that will come along the way. So I'm with you on that. If you're in AFL fantasy, though, which is where at this time of year really comes into itself in terms of the engagement of fantasy coaches, because it's 2 trades a week, use it or lose it. Like you said, Preuss, Duncan, Cripps, wouldn't be uncommon to have one of those in your team. The issue it does mention is it stops you from potentially trying to avoid a tag, such as Nick Dacos getting Ryan Clarked. Not guaranteed, but I'd say likely. Potentially a Lockie Neal might get a Windhager or an Owens, giving some attention to roll through there. So these are the kind of things that, or people that have got the Darcy Camerons or the Sean Darcys, or these underwhelming players that have been good to a point, they're now not able to jump off. So Kane, talk to me through how we should be approaching this round in AFL fantasy when you're kind of hamstrung with one part, but you're still trying to get creative and avoid potential bad matchups.
Well, again, with the players that are out, if you don't have any cover for a Mitch Duncan or a Preuss, or even a Cripps, well, that's your first point of call then, isn't it? You got to make some trades and cover that. You don't want to be thinking a donut for no reason. I think the hard thing after that, MJ, is what's your combinations? Because obviously if you're moving on a Lockie Neal or a Nick Dacos, there's a decent amount of cash on their head, but it's going to come down to predictions. And that's where it gets, as I said, daily fantasy like is, if Lockie Neal gets a tag and it's in the 60s or 70s and you can find that ceiling player that can go 130 plus, that's huge.
70 points,
especially
right
a Lockie
there.
Neal, where maybe we're projecting forward, and Harms currently isn't in the Melbourne side, but we know last time he played Melbourne, and the Lions do play the Demons in the last game of the season, and the way the ladder's sort of shaping out, the winner of that game probably gets top 4, the loser misses out. So it's really a final before a final. So that's a concern.
Yep.
So there's going to be, crazy enough, there's going to be a player that you could have traded out or could have kept, and you could probably make up almost 120, 130 points on this decision in the next 2 weeks. If you have a player that gets tagged or has a poor game and you don't find the ceiling player, or you do find the ceiling player, and that's why it's really stressful, because we're not used to making that. We're used to saying this player over the course of the season,
8 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever.
8 to 10 weeks. And that's where I think the matchups really come into it. And again, you start dealing with cash, and that's why this game's hard, because it's all projections. You've basically got to look at your team, have a projection in your mind for what you think that player in your team can score, and then go through and find, well, what do the players I don't own, what can they score, and what's the biggest bang for my buck in making that trade? And that's where it's easy if you got Duncan, Preuss, Green, Cripps, because you're starting with them out. You don't have to worry about projecting everyone else. If you got a 0, you start with that. If you've got Green and Duncan, okay, what's the money you've got there?
What's the best forward combo I can get?
What's the best combination you can get? And I think when you look through the matchups, MJ, you mentioned St Kilda, Brisbane. Brisbane not overly easy, especially for a Rowan Marshall. Brisbane's one of the hardest ruck matchups.
Yeah.
Now they're just going with Oscar McInerney at this stage. There's nothing that really scares you in terms of, it's not the Darcy Ford and McInerney, but we know McInerney on his own is very hard to score.
Very restrictive.
But at the same time, Rowan Marshall playing, a lot of time on ground as the solo ruck, he can do pretty well. You mentioned Neal with the tag potentially.
Yeah.
Is there a Matheson that goes to a Steele? Is there a Matheson that goes to a Sinclair or a Hill? You project to the next game, Adelaide and North Melbourne. Now, Aaron Hall, Jaden Stevenson, cheap guys for the way they've either performed previously or their current vein of form. But then I look at the weather in Adelaide on the weekend, pretty wet, not really conducive to chip mark.
Well, it could be a Sam Berry
that we know
day.
Yeah,
based
maybe
on
that's
that
a Sam Berry game.
Yeah.
So I think that's where it gets really, really interesting. You just think Freo West Coast. You think Freo would really be trying to stamp themselves? Is it a Luke Ryan, Hayden Young, Jordan Clark?
But earlier in the year, that was the game the Eagles tagged Brayshaw. So that, again, you look at the matchup and you go, oh, this is his gravy game. This is going to be amazing. It might not be the case. Maybe you look at Melbourne midfielder, you're a Clayton Oliver owner and you go, non-owner, and you go, this is the matchup. Well, again, we know the Blues don't have their full group of midfielders to choose from, but still notoriously they're a harder one to pick from. And then you start looking at the other matchups and going, well, history says Sydney tag a halfback. And there's been no more creative halfback in the game this year for Collingwood other than a Nick Dacos. It's been screamed across media channels, when is someone going to tag him? You might even be looking, going, oh, I need a cheap ceiling defender. Mason Redmond can pop 150s. Yeah, but he's playing against one of the most restrictive teams this week in Port Adelaide that just deny the football. So rather than just posing out these dilemmas, and even for the Bulldogs, Stephen Martin's back. That's probably going to
Ash and Perryman have tagged.
Yeah. That we're going to see some clipping of some ceilings. And this is the challenge too in AFL fantasy, where you've relatively got a team of quote unquote premiums. And so now you're just playing fixture matchups. There's going to be calls you make in the next 48 hours, 24 hours that work out beautifully for you. For example, if you traded into Jaden Stevenson last week, worked beautifully for you. But if you went, oh, Darcy Cameron looked good in the ruck, I'm going to hold him and I'm going to trade out Nick Dacos. Well, that didn't work for you. So these are those 50-50 challenges for us. So let's help some coaches, Kane, as we're looking at these teams with a 2-week lens. Who are the positions? Let's look at the back line. Who's got, if you could throw a wish list over backs, no price, and then maybe looking for some value, just purely AFL fantasy. And the reason we're doing it is, again, we buy you some time to look. Dream teamers and super coaches, the formed ideology we're coming from is, if you've got more than 2 trades a week, what have you been doing left? If you've got, what have you been doing? So you're really just making sideways style maneuvers. You probably don't have a heap of cash. So that's why we're focusing on AFL fantasy. So let's talk defenders based on matchups this week. Who looks really strong to you? And then who could be a value option in our backline to go after?
Well, again, if you don't have him, MJ, Doherty screams as a guy that...
It's a beautiful matchup, isn't it, against the Demons?
Melbourne into Collingwood to end of the season. 1 win for Carlton, basically locks up a final spot. Now, his scoring's, the ceiling's capped a little bit just by the fact that there might not be those chunks of game, that time at the end of the game where they can have kick mark, which is, we know Doherty's a guy that can score 30 points in 2 minutes if that goes his way. But I think the way Melbourne defend, they don't mind you having the ball slowly in half back and sort of switching side to side. He's a guy that I like. Again, on the cheaper front, do you think an Adam Sard gets involved in that sort of game? He's a little bit more damaging, can attract a little bit more attention than a Doherty. Again, you have to think that I wouldn't be surprised, MJ, if a Luke Ryan, Jordan Clark, those type of Hayden Young can do
could
something.
Be an interesting one. Yeah.
Now they go into GWS the next week, but you don't really fear GWS round 23. Not much to play for. Fremantle, it's all to play for them.
100%.
I could see them getting that lead, and they do like a kick mark game. So again, Luke Ryan's got a ceiling. We know Hayden Young's shown a bit of a ceiling, and Jordan Clark being the cheaper of those guys, he's shown an ability to be in the 90s with the potential to put up a ton.
Yep.
So
I agree.
Wouldn't think West Coast would put any attention into someone like him or even the Luke Ryan. Hayden Young's probably the one that could attract some attention maybe from GWS.
But we saw the Eagles let
in that
Dawson roam free last week against the Crows.
Yeah, I think
that's fair.
really their MO. So I think Freo, when you look at what's to play for, because you do have to be cautious, like we saw with Geelong this week with Mitch Duncan. You don't think about a rest typically in round 23 with the bye.
No.
But again, if there's a niggle there, if there's something that's somewhat troublesome, that these teams will be happy to rest.
2 or 3 weeks
I like
rest.
some of the Freo guys. And again, the real cheap one that jumps out to me is Zorko at 600K under the roof at Marvel. Now, he's played more forward in recent weeks, more mid-forward, but we know that's a role in the past that he can go big.
Yep. And it's Melbourne the following week too.
Yeah, which again is not going to be a tag game, but again, they've got it all to play for. So Zorko is the one I think that's as low as I'd
the
go.
Value back.
He's exactly 600K.
Yeah.
Now clearly Luke Ryan is, he's almost top of the tree outside of Sinclair and Doherty. There's only really Dawson and Brayshaw that are more expensive than him. I don't love when you're coming off the 151, just because I feel like you might have missed a trick. But again, you look at the 3 before that, it's a 98, 124, 101. So can get it done, takes kick-ins. He ticks a lot of boxes. West Coast, again, solid matchup. He's a guy that sometimes he gets in on the party, sometimes he doesn't. It's really like that for him. That can be the range between a 70 and a 120 if he gets some of those real easy kick marks. You'd have to be a little bit worried about North doing something to Dawson. You'd have to be worried about Port the next week for Dawson. Again, you wouldn't be jumping off.
But you're not trading into.
It's flexible, but I don't think you're going into there. And other than that, MJ.
A guy for me, there's a couple of really, if you're just chasing ceiling and there's a calculated risk, Harry Himmelberg's one in the sense of, if you go back and look at the narrative of how defenders have scored supremely, probably over the last month, well and truly over above against the Bulldogs, Himmelberg, if he has that defensive role, to a lesser extent than Isaac Cumming, like if Taylor was available in a draft, I'd be looking at that. But they are all high-risk picks. And the reason I say that is the outs that have hit the GWS Giants this round does allude to Himmelberg needing to play a little more forward. Like there's an article I wrote at coachespanel.tv, you can go and check it out now, about the 10 moves that made you year. Picking Himmelberg after the bye was one of them. But right now, I wouldn't trade into him. But if I owned him, I'd have this weird combination of I could get a 200 or I could get a 20. It doesn't look good, MJ, when you look at that team sheet. The team sheet does not give confidence.
When you see Taylor, Keith, Perry, now I know Keith might have to do some rucking because Preuss is out and Briggs is in the ruck, but Taylor, Keith, Haynes, with a bench of Steen and Aaliyah. Like that's 5 guys that have played key position back, and Himmelberg's named in the 4th. Now we don't really care where they're named, but
that's
when he's named alongside Hogan, Riccardi, and Himmelberg, that sort of makes sense.
No Pete Ling.
It's
looks
very lacking.
nervous.
So again, you'd love to get off if you could.
Sure.
And if you can, I get it. Now is he more of a priority than a tagged Dacos and a tagged Neil? And considering what you might better get up to midfield wise for a Neil and
sure,
but that's the thing you got to worry about. We know they can swing him at any time in the game.
Yep.
The other one I will say, MJ, before we move off the defenders is Dan Houston is that risk reward guy.
Yeah, that's a good shout.
When you've got him under the roof at Marvel, and then you're finishing with a showdown, which always has a bit of feeling. But his range is a little bit alarming, really. What Houston can do is like he can be 120, 130, he can be 60, and he's also got a little bit of injury risk. But again, you've got him under the roof at Marvel. You know there's a ceiling, like there's a genuine ceiling. But it's just, you don't know. You just don't know with him. So if he's the one, you'd almost be, I feel like, for these guys at this lower end, and we'll probably cover it when we get to the other lines, because I think that the back line is one where a lot of people sort of have the Sinclairs and the Dohertys and the Dawsons if they want them. You're probably letting your other upgrade determine how much cash you have.
Yeah.
Because I look at these guys from Stevenson to Houston to Hall, all in that, even a Clark, a Luke Ryan, in a 2-game sample size, genuinely anything could happen. Ed Richards, if you like form,
He's going as well as anyone.
Richards is rolling, he's been ultra impressive. Like last 4 weeks, he hasn't gone below 90.
Yeah, wow.
He's just been an absolute rock. So I think it's these other lines that we're going to chat about next. If you need a defender, you're getting that other line that you love, and then you're rolling the dice. If it's Sorko, because you need it as cheap as possible, go for it. If you got a little bit more money and you think, okay, Houston has a bit more ceiling, go for it. Stevenson, watch the game and see if the weather's cleared by the time Saturday comes around. Roll with it, because they've all got the ability to be 120 plus. They've all got the ability to be 60 in a 2-week period. They could get you 240, or they could get you 120 and get you 100 points. That's just the range of these guys. So
that's true.
I think the midfield, you've got a few more options.
Yeah, I think you do. So the midfield, I think everyone that's not a Rory-led owner is still trying to find a way to go up it and get to him. I don't think he's the right play in the next 2 weeks, to be honest. Not because he's not going to be a great scorer, but more the amount of money you've got to spend on top of him. You might be doing your team as a combination of trades a disservice. Now, the caveat is, if the moves you're making this week is, I've got money to burn, like I've got cash just sitting there and I'm just fleecing my bench, sure, okay. But if you're in this situation where, as Kane's talking about this, all of a sudden maneuver of two and what's the best outcome, then getting the most expensive player in the game, that as great as Laird has been, by the way, he's also not been disastrously killing you, with the exception of round 18 against Collingwood. Because outside of that, he's not going over 140 all year. Now, I know we're talking about a guy who hasn't gone under 125 since round 14, and he went 124. So I'm a Crows fan. I'm a Laird owner in a number of formats. I'm not knocking it. Rather, I am trying to say is don't just go Laird at all costs, because you have to think in totality. That said, if you can get him, it's a challenging couple of weeks potentially. North is not going to be the easiest matchup in terms of Cunnington in, probably their best midfield unit, Greenwood coming out, and then Port Adelaide. Well, we know how restrictive they can be. Sydney's probably got the best matchup, don't they, of the next 2 weeks in terms of a fixture, don't they, Kane?
Yeah, I think so. If you can avoid the player that gets Wintager or Owens.
Yes.
Now, Owens has been doing more of the forward role, straight to the mid. Now, you would have to guess on damaging and on all the numbers that are maybe you'd say game deciding, it would be Warner. In terms of actually hitting scoreboard, creating scores, he's the one where the attention goes.
Yep.
Parker doesn't seem to get any attention, which is the one where, again, if I'm saying let your other upgrade determine your other trade in, it's probably Parker that jumps out to me in terms of, it's tough in the 2-game sample size, but the floor is really high. We've had the one aberration, which was the North Melbourne game. That's basically, we're talking since round 10, there's, a low of 85. It's all to play for the Swans. St Kilda in the last round at Marvel, that will be a lot on the line. It's the last game of the round.
We'll know a lot.
Last game of the home and away season. He's just a guy, though, that you feel like he'll get it done. I wouldn't have too many qualms about him. In terms of another midfield, that maybe could they go off? I still like Walsh.
I'm a big rap on Walsh.
I'm a big rap
on Walsh
next week. Now the ceiling hasn't been there.
No.
But now we've got Walsh, no Cripps, no Hewitt,
Kennedy.
No Kennedy. Melbourne's not going to tag. Collingwood's not going to tag. I feel like he's one that can go off. And other than that, MJ, the other ones you start jumping out to me is these North guys. Do they have something just to play for in terms of let's just finish the
Huntington back.
season the right way. I look at Adelaide and Gold Coast. I don't think Gold Coast is going to tag. We know their season is over in that sense. So do you go Simpkin? Do you go David Duniac?
LDU. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see there being too much difference in terms of their role with Cunnington back in. I think it's a lot to ask Cunnington to, really step up and be maybe the player he was. And then the last one I like, just purely for his ceiling, and I don't think he gets any attention, is McCluggage. I really like the way he plays his footy.
It's a good shot.
And he's got that ability to go big. But again, it feels like a line, MJ, that, again, do you really feel like this is my guy this week? Even Mills, the way he can be thrown around role-wise. So they've really cleared a path there for Warner and Rowbottom. We know Papley gets a lot of CBAs in terms of starting quarters. He gets that first one, and Mills comes in off the wing, and it just takes that edge off him at times where he can have these patches where he's out of the game. And if the game script doesn't flow that way, he can get left out of it a little bit. Whereas Parker's very, very reliable in the consistency of his role, his time on ground. He's just a very experienced, good player, isn't he? He's done it for so long. He can put on the 30 to 40 to 50-point quarters to salvage a score. I feel like, probably you can tell from the way I'm talking about him, he's probably almost the pick of the week. For me, I just have a bit of confidence. Now, it's probably not confidence in terms of 130, 140, because he's not really that type of guy. But you feel like, I'll get 100 to 115 probably for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And you live to fight another day. You can play him in the forward line. And again, it fixes a Mitch Duncan. It probably fixes a Preuss. And you just have to gamble on your other position, which is already, as I said, you've got as much confidence in Zorko as you've got in Luke Ryan over a 2-week stretch.
And that's
just the volatility.
Yeah. You're picking the guy you trade into this week. You have to be able to be thinking, I want them next week too. Because, again, you might get lucky and be able to flip them. Sure, but that's the mindset of I've got to be prepared for a 2-week.
And that's why, MJ, I would be scared of a lot. Like I mentioned North Melbourne for those midfielders just because of the matchup, and I think they are safe. But really, you want to be picking players from the top 10 teams because as it currently stands, those are the 10 that can make finals.
Yeah.
And really, they all still have a chance going. They have a live chance going into next week already. Carlton, doesn't matter if they lose to Melbourne, they've still got a live chance. There's a few things like that. The only team that that could have their season ended, looking at it this week, is really the Dogs. If the Dogs were to slip up and things went Richmond and Carlton's way, that's good night. But even a St Kilda, it would require Carlton to beat Melbourne. It would require Richmond, to have a win as well. So I think a lot of these teams, and again, there's a lot of good players, and especially the top 6. If you're going Geelong, Collingwood, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, and Freo, there's probably not many Geelong guys you really want across a 2-week stretch.
No.
But if you're going Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, and Freo, there's a bit in that. There's a bit in that you can maybe, get a lot of bang for your buck for.
Yeah, it's true. The midfields is a fun line to experiment in. That's the beauty of it, is the range of options to choose from is there. And that's where it starts to come into the outside of the fixture. It can come into, I just need a separation in my league matchup this week. And I'm going to create, this guy's a Neil owner. If you're bullish on he gets the tag this week, which is a fair narrative based on what we've seen over the past couple of weeks from St Kilda. Okay, I'm going to take on Neil and I'm going to get Brad Crouch and go, Brad's the most informed midfielder in the competition at the moment alongside Rory Laird over the past 3 weeks. My opponent's not going to have him. No attention. I'm going that way. And then you've just got to be prepared to, like we said at the start of the episode, these are the moves that can make or break matchups and ranking moments, because you're going from players capable of doing the exact identical thing and banking on the guy you trade in to do it and the guy you trade out not to do it. There are risks that come with trades at this time of year. The key is your logic and narrative sound? And if the answer is yes, then it's luck. And that's such a hugely important part of the game is luck going your way. If you were a Mitch Duncan owner 7 weeks ago, you were looking at trading him out. Tom Stewart goes down injured. Luck goes your way. He now becomes the key distributor over the past couple of months. That's an element of luck going your way. In the rucks, is it just as simple as if you're not a Gorn owner, you're jumping into Gorn? Is it as simple as that? Okay.
For me, MJ, it is. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
me too.
if you don't have Gorn, if you already have Gorn,
yep,
and you've got to recover a Preuss and you don't have a Cameron, Marshall, English already, I think that's probably where it actually gets quite tricky.
Trading into a second ruck, yeah.
I just...
Because Marshall on value is it, but the matchup, especially
the
this
matchup's
week,
not
is challenging.
ideal. You're paying top dollar, which again, 2-week sample size, but English. Why is Steph Martin back in the team? What's that split? Is it one last little spin for Steph Martin, and Bruce is out of that team, so someone's going to have to carry a little bit more weight forward.
Yep.
Nane Curvis just played a sensational game.
It was a blinder
against Port. Now, again,
there's
Hawthorn's
no one
not
there.
Exactly a super scary proposition. We know what Marshall just did against Hawthorn with McAvoy. So, for me, that's maybe a guy that if you have to just say, hey, this is a 2-week push, Nank's got a ceiling. He's got an ability to put a score up and he can match those guys. And again, if that's all you can get to, or if you really just need a cheap option.
I've heard of worse options.
But Essendon's not. But then the next week you look at Essendon's one of the hardest ruck matchups.
Yeah, correct.
That's the tricky thing. I think with these guys, I think the guy that probably jumps out to me is the safest. If I'm going elsewhere, I'll just go Riley O'Brien. I know he's had some poor games, but if you think it's going to be a bit wet and you've got North and Port's really not rolling with much of a ruckman at all. No. He's probably where I'd start thinking about. Again, you're still somewhat interested in English though, MJ. If he's going up against Briggs and Keith, even if Steph Martin plays 50% of it, and it's 50-50, you think the Dogs are winning it. Sure. English is dangerous forward as well. Like he can kick goals. It's under the roof at Marvel. I just think you probably go English if you want to just be different for different sake, as you said, in a matchup point of view. I don't hate O'Brien, and if you just need cash, it's probably Nate Curvis.
Yep, I think that's fair. Then the forwards, the names that, if you don't own a Bailey Smith, you're probably looking there. He doesn't have a great club history against the Giants, but also, to be fair, he doesn't have a great history against a lot of people outside of this season. So I don't think you can read too much narrative into that. So you probably already are a Dunkley owner. Bontempelli. Again, you're all looking at the same things. And then it's the names you mentioned earlier, which is Marshall. Not a great matchup, but certainly the most informed forward. Parker, probably an option to really safely look at and go, look, at worst, I'm walking away from pair and 90s outside of an injury here. Jaden Stevenson, I think, is one of the better options to go in, but that weather and the way that game could play out might. And
Adelaide, MJ, if they're on the way they harass the ball carrier, they're a bit more built for the wet.
Yes.
Around that forward area where he's going to play, your Mick Henrys, your Saligos, those guys that, we saw what they did to Carlton. They don't give you much time and space.
Yeah.
They don't want to just let you hold onto the footy. They really want to get in your face and pressure you, and it's not really conducive to kick mark.
That's right. And then you're starting to head into just hoping territory with Goulden, Butters, Cornelia. Maybe it's a bit harsh to say hoping territories, but
very expensive.
But he's on the more expensive side of things. And then it is into the territories of Berries, Rosies, Liberatores, Trelaws. That on
Dylan
your
Moore's
game,
probably the one, MJ, that I think.
Yeah, Dylan Moore's the
probably
one.
in that Parker light mold in terms of.
That's a good shout.
Think it would be ridiculous ceiling.
No.
And again, he can, but I think looking at the 2 weeks, you're probably hoping you're getting what his sort of last week's score was, which is 101. If you're getting 200 points across 2 weeks, you're pretty happy. You feel
Yep.
like Parker's probably more in the 105 a week. Maybe there's the 110 and then there's the 95 sort of style. That's sort of how he seems to roll. But yeah, again, you look at the last scorers last week, MJ in the forward line. Josh Kennedy 120, Elijah Hollins 118, Jesse Hogan 117. Like
That's
it's that type
limit.
of position. It's volatile.
Yeah.
With who's kicking goals? Is there who's pulling these sort of reins? So, and again, probably the other one, MJ, that if you really, really want to push it,
this will be good.
He's so cheap, and I probably should have brought him up in the defender section as well. He's so cheap, but he has this ability to score. It's Brad Hill. He's the guy. When I look at Brisbane, Brisbane don't tag in terms of in that forward line. They've got so much firepower that they just say, we're going with our firepower against yours.
Yeah.
Now, where he comes into a 50-50 is the following week. Does Clark go to Sinclair or does he go to Hill? Now, when they played earlier in the season, he went to Sinclair, but Hill didn't play. So
correct.
They're both at Marvel, which is the positive I see for Hill. I think when they're playing at Marvel, again, we've mentioned how much the Saints have to play for. Now he's a dicey operator. The one thing you do have with Hill is he plays tomorrow night.
Yeah.
So if you want to take a gamble, and again, your backup might be Jace Burgoyne.
Sure.
If you want to take a gamble, because it seems like that's how Hill rolls. When I look at his
bench him, he's 50 or 100, isn't he? Yeah,
exactly. So if you're going to get Hill in, put him on the bench.
Yeah,
put the E on him, and just have a gamble that way, and maybe hope that if he does drop a 50, maybe your Chase Burgoyne or your other cow that you might have can maybe pluck one out for you.
Yeah,
like that he's at that scary cheap level. When you're at 550k, like that's what you're asking for, isn't it, MJ? You could get 100 like he did last week.
Yep.
But he has thrown up 30s. So if you're really that stretched, and you're like, I've got to do anything I can to get up to the Parker as the safe guy.
Yep.
I think he's the one that you could be thinking about. But again, MJ, 2-week sample size. This is what makes it so hard. I don't see, we had that one years ago where it was Jeremy Cameron.
Yep.
We're trying to win the Colin. You go, they're going to force feed him. Now, we didn't probably see the Josh Kennedy force feeding last week where you go, okay, this is a guy that could be a 1-week play. I don't see that personally this week where I go, yep, this is the super cheap guy. Everything lines up. He's going to do this and that. But yeah, maybe you can pluck a guy. And even ceiling MJ, how funny is it? A lot of these guys that are at the cheaper price, they haven't shown a ceiling before. It's not till they produce it that you go, I didn't even know I had that ceiling in him.
Yep.
Like David Swallow's not busting out 130s every week. Like it's just, that's the hard thing with this type of decision is you don't have much of a sample size to deal with. One little knock, one bad rotation, one bit of bad weather, it can flip the script in. So really, you come down to these things and you say, who are the two players you like? You'd be happy to hold them for 2 weeks.
What's the combination?
And again, I always try to sit with, if their team is in the hunt, like the serious hunt, like I mentioned, that top 10 is, and even more that top 6, positioning is everything. You take Geelong out of that with the way they sit in their opponents to come, it's hell for leather. It's finals before finals with what's on the line.
Yep.
So you're not going to get shenanigans with people all of a sudden thrown into a different position, or you're unlikely to, unless personnel drastically changes. So if you're weighing things up and it's a Giant or a Lion, I'm going the Lion. I'm going the guy that's got it all to play for.
I agree.
But don't be, if you're having this decision and you're thinking, I don't know what to do, it's overwhelming, 2 weeks, look at your league matchup. Maybe if you're not sure, just neutralize. Just pick a player that, or at the very least, hold that trade. If they're a player that plays later in the week, a Mitch Duncan, you've got a few games to go by.
Can you pop the Elijah Hollins
see how that
off the
see
bench?
how that matchup goes? Yeah, see how that matchup goes. Use your bench. Maybe you go, hey, I only need to hit a 90 here to feel really good. Well, now a Parker, a Moore. Maybe if you need to go ceiling, okay, it's going to be a Dan Houston roll the dice on a Sunday afternoon at Marvel. Like, all those things sometimes just inform your decision making. Going, yep, I need the boom or bust guy. It's like, nope, I just need a
safe 90.
Get a single. Just get a
That's
single.
right.
Move the strike. Let another player be that one that wins me the matchup. So it is a really tricky time. I know people, we're sitting here going, geez, you didn't make it any easier for us. And it isn't easy. I don't think we have real players, unless you're just loaded to the gills, MJ.
You can go up
If
to
I'm
the
loaded to the gills, I'm going Parker. I'm going
Dylan
Moore in the forward line. I'm going Angus Brayshaw because I just feel like forward or back. Forward or midfield or back, he's really safe. If it's wet, he's safe. He'll tackle. If it's sunny, he'll mark. Like, there's players that that they don't need it to be, certain game scripts. Under the roof at Marvel, that always helps because it's going to be played a certain type of way. A ruckman. If you got a ruckman and a sole ruck, they're probably going to get their chances regardless. They got that built-in sort of floor. So don't be afraid to take a gamble. If you see a matchup, if you look through the teams and go, there's not really a matchup for this guy, or I think this team's going to win by 40 points. Well, who are the guys that feast in big wins? Look at that win-loss difference. Are they a team that end of the game, they just kick it back and forth in defense? So that's where a lot of the times these ceilings just go boom. Avoid the taggers. That's probably the safest point.
That's the safest approach, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. If you're avoiding those guys, you got guys with some role certainty. Ben Keith, you felt like you had role certainty to a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Then he does a good job up forward and he doesn't come back. So that's why those top teams, consistent, roles consistent,
know what you're trading into.
You know what you're trading into. It just alleviates a bit of the risk. And again, those guys like Luke Ryan sound appealing. Those guys with the big ceiling sound appealing. But sometimes, 9,500.
Yep.
I'm paying for it. I get it. I move on.
Yep. It's fair enough too. All right. Before we wrap up this episode, want to hit just a couple of our Patreon questions. A few of them we've kind of answered them along the way. Jeremy wants to know, I've got one trade available in AFL Fantasy. Who is the greater trade out priority? There are 3 names he's listed. Number 1, Nick Dacos. Number 2, Sean Darcy. Number 3, Lachie Neale. So whatever his other trade is for Jeremy, I don't know if he's got a Cripps or whatever. Who out of those 3 for you would be the greater trade out priority this week?
It'd be Nick Dacos for me, MJ.
Yep.
I think Sean Darcy up against West Coast, that's just a matchup that they sort of just get up for. Pretty safe, just with his being a ruckman. Lachie Neale, yes, there's a Windhager tag potentially coming, but we know Brisbane, good team. Neale's a guy that really can fight through. Yep. And also with those type of midfield tags, often if it's not going that way and you need a different makeup in the midfield,
it can drop it quickly.
It can get dropped. It can get dropped. Yeah, it can get dropped in the second half. The Dacos one, Clark is unrelenting. Clark will play on you until it is over. The game will be over. And he just doesn't
He'll
go
follow
away.
you down the race to the showers at the end of the game, still thinking the job's needed to be done.
Yeah, and I think now Dacos has kick-in, so he's got a little bit of built-in score. But he's the one I see. If there's going to be a 50 and a 60, it's coming from him. Now, again, you're probably not getting the same type of prospect, are you? If you're trading out Neale, you're getting a heavy. You're getting a real good mid.
Yeah.
Dacos, you're probably a little bit more speculative, but he has done a really good job of getting
He's
up to
done
a price
better than
range.
Anything that we could have dreamed of.
It's 30K to Brayshaw.
Yeah.
That's pretty safe if you go in there. I think Gussie's going to give you minimum.
Well, he'll give you the 90
across 2 weeks
over the next 2 weeks, which is fair enough.
So that's an easy one for me, MJ.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Ian McRae's asked a question: who are the must-have players on each line for finals? I think we've addressed that for you, Ian, throughout the episode.
Probably Parker Moore in the forward line.
Doherty in the back line.
Doherty in the back line. I think English will be up there. Brayshaw for his safety in the back line.
Yeah, correct.
In the midfield, it's probably a bit more flexible. I love Clayton Oliver's
Clayton's always as
season.
safe as houses anyway.
Yeah,
isn't
he's got a ceiling about him as well.
Yeah, correct.
Steele is a bit more risky. I think Mills is always going to be there just because in 2 weeks it could be 130, 130.
Laird's
could be
the
80,
same.
80.
If you've got the money,
Yeah.
you're neutralizing potentially the greatest weapon against you. All right, fair enough. Stephen Summers has a question. Do I trade Rosie anyway? I'm favored in my league, so it's a defensive move to bring him into Parker. Rosie does have a poor matchup this week. I'd be more worried about coming off the injury than the matchup.
Yeah. Bombers are funny, MJ, because before last week against the Giants, they were the most restrictive team in the comp on form, Essendon.
Correct.
So that's the poor matchup. Now, last week, the Giants
That
had
obviously
no trouble
changed.
scoring at all. So, that was a bit weird. You had 5 Giants.
It feels more like a unicorn exception rather than a new normative.
It was a really weird one. I think I'd be doing it purely because if his knee's troublesome and it's Parker, like I can see 60-point gap there.
Yeah, I can. I'd trade
and
to Parker.
I don't love Rosie's match. If Rosie was Dylan Moore,
different
you go,
story.
okay, yeah, he can do it. But I think that is probably a time where defensive, is necessary. Now,
Correct.
The one thing I will say with that is, do not rush that trade.
Yeah,
I would not be making that trade until 3:18, a couple minutes before the Sydney bounce, because you might want to go a different direction.
Something else might come.
If you're in trouble there, and Parker's just going to be another same player, like you might have to hold that and go, you know what? I need 20 more points.
Well, all of a sudden,
Parker, that's not going to help me. You might need to go Butters.
That's right.
It might have to be Butters. So I would be holding that, seeing how the matchups are going.
It's good
now,
advice,
if you're going to win, just neutralize, get Parker, lock that,
and potentially at that point in time in the round 2, you might be going.
MJ,
I've already got it in.
There's not many players that you might have unique by that point against each other. So
Correct.
I'd be holding it.
Yeah,
but
you might already have won the game by then. You might be able to save that trade. And again, if it's AFL fantasy, it's a different story. But if it's a limited trade formats, that might be helpful. So I think it's good advice.
That is the perk of Rosie playing last, is you've got
correct
a lot of information that will come in between now and then.
Yeah,
to make that trade to Parker,
and a viable across the same team trade to be able to make, which is good. All right, last 4 questions before we wrap up this episode. Jared's asked the question, keeper league question. How highly do you rate Josh Ward going forward? Can we just say highly?
I would have him only behind Nick Dacos from this class.
I agree with that.
And I think even from previous year's drafts, like for me, the way he moves and the way he builds score, MJ, he is a fantasy player. So
and he's
even
done
for
it
me,
as a junior. Yeah.
Yeah, like I the first names that come to my head that I even have him ahead of, like I've got him ahead of a guy like Matt Rao. I've got him ahead of guys
right now.
like
You should,
that, just because I look at that Hawthorn midfield
and what he's done year 1,
and what he's done year 1, and that age, and the balance in his game, inside, outside, running. He's a guy that he's got the tools.
Newcomb's going to do the hard stuff.
Yeah, I think he's just a very, very special player. The stuff you hear about him off field, leadership wise, like just a guy that's firmly got his head screwed on already as a first year player.
Yeah.
I've got him right up there. He's probably going to be pretty close to our, he might not be in our 50 most. It's going to be in that conversation that we're going to have.
He'd be on the unlucky to miss. Like you're projecting pretty hard, but
as we say, MJ, if you've got him for that, if you've got him for that's a keeper league. If you've got him for your whole career, if you're projecting, this guy's a 100 guy by year 3, or a 95 guy.
It's doing what Sam Walsh is doing, which is year 1 really exciting. Year 2,
he'll be a guy
some
that
ups
we
and
will
downs.
have to discuss. He might be an honourable mention, just missed the 50, or he might be,
maybe
in the
even
40s.
sneak in. Yep. No, it's a really good shout.
Highly.
Yeah, I agree. Supercoach replacement for Cripps. Who do you like out of these guys? TK wants to know. LDU, Parrish, Libber, or Andy Brayshaw? For me, I'll let you marinate on that. I love Libber.
Yep. The 2 that jumped out was Libber and and Parrish.
Yeah.
Parrish purely for the ceiling,
Yes.
because he's not a guy. The good thing about Supercoach MJ, when you're seeing Supercoach well, it doesn't matter if the team is awfully restrictive if you're efficient.
Correct.
And Parrish can be extremely efficient. He can turn 80s into 130s.
No doubt.
So that's the type of guy I do like. But I think with what's on the line, is there anyone else you'd bet on other than Libba? You've got the Giants. You've got the Hawks. Now, do you worry about McGuinness? Because
Maybe.
The thing with Parrish is, the thing I love about Parrish, he's got Essendon. Sorry,
Correct.
He's got Richmond in the final round. He's got Richmond in the final round.
Running
Parrish,
free.
and he goes massive. So I'd probably lean Parrish, but after that it would be Libba, just because he's so consistent. But you probably, if I said to you, Perryman's gone to Libba and Finn McGuinness has gone to Libba in back-to-back weeks, you wouldn't be shocked. The hard thing is, if I told you it was Bailey Smith, McRae, Bailey Dale, Caleb Daniel, Bonton Kelly that those guys went to, that's the issue. And when you've got 2 weeks, that's almost what scares you off any of these dogs outside of English, is that there's teams that tag, and McGuinness can tag Smith, he can take the
inside midfielder, the winger, the half-forward flank,
exactly.
The half-back flank.
So if you trade into that and cop it in a 2-week sample size, it's really painful. So that's where I'd go Parrish, then Dunkley. Andy Brayshaw is great, but the ceiling in Supercoach,
it's just not quite
really
there yet, is it?
No, he's a bit more outside. He's tackling, all those things don't really get rewarded like they do in AFL fantasy.
No, it's fair enough. All right, last 2 questions. Brendan Wright, who's one of the few, not one of the few, but he's one of the leading contenders to win Dream Team this year.
Dear.
He's one of those guys.
Try on this question.
We got to try on this one, but he's one of those annoying people that he's having a good year in every format. Like one of those, he's going to finish top 100.
When you're seeing him, MJ, though,
he's seeing them like beach balls in Shane Warne cricket, mate.
Great.
That's what he's doing.
You love those years.
That's exactly how he's seeing it. Along the way, he's got a Zorko question. We've kind of talked about it. Is Zorko worth the punt to allow the funds to the upgrade? I think we've kind of answered it. We're saying yes.
Yes, haven't we, MJ? We have, because that's, again, if he could roll out of 10. Like, he genuinely could.
Could be injured in the first 5 minutes. We don't want him to.
He's been one of the best. I don't think we've celebrated this guy more than many other players on the coaches panel. We've absolutely loved what Zorko's done.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's always been that guy that we've really tipped into. So for 2 weeks, you'd hope so. Again, how many times to say it? Brisbane, everything to play for. Absolutely everything to play for. I am tipping into it if you need to, because
especially if it gets you the secondary move you need.
Oh yeah, if that's what you need to do, just absolutely go for it. Again, we've got to tick that off.
Yeah, I am too. And then the last one comes from fellow panelist and also a Patreon supporter in Jordox. He says he's in his Dream Team prelim final. Who does he get in for Taranto? These are some names he's listed: Marshall, Parker, Baslenka, or Gawn. He's got a leaning between 2, but he can't split them. So without me telling you who the ones he's splitting, because I have a feeling you might shake his world up a bit here. Who is the one that leads for you?
Parker leads, but I would have Gawn next.
Yeah.
After that, I just worry if it's your prelim, you don't want to have the potentially tricky matchup of McInerney for Marshall. Like, I'm not super scared if I'm up against Jordox in this example and he's got Marshall. I'm not really worried about much over a 110.
Not this week, yeah.
Somewhat hopeful that maybe, it's a 70. Whereas Parker, I'm going, okay, that's a 100.
Yeah.
It might be a 90, might be a 120. And now Gawn
could be anything.
Gawn could sort of defy fixture in a way when he's on. Against Brisbane, again, he's got that in the grand final. If you're projecting forward,
correct, which you need to
be. I think you have to be. You have to, again, if you want to win it, you've always got to be looking forward. He's probably second. So I'd have Parker
Me too.
going after that. It's just he is a bit volatile. Again, when he's on,
He's the best.
there's no one better.
Yep.
So I'd have Parker first, and then I'd just go from there.
Yep. It's a really good shout. Hey, Kane, as always, man, we appreciated your work right throughout the 2022 season. Thank you again for this episode, mate.
Of course, MJ, no problem.
If you got any questions or dilemmas or things you're not sure of, the good news is our Patreons get heaps of ease and exclusive access to not just fellow Patreons, but the coaches panel as well. For just a couple of bucks a month, you can help support the coaches panel, but also get access to a bunch of other great tiers and rewards. All the links for you at that are at coachespanel.tv. There's some articles I've dropped throughout this week, as have some other team members you can go and check out there. And then, wow, you're just a week and a bit away from your fantasy season being done. We hope whatever the trades you make this week, if you have the luxury of making them, that they all work out for you. And we can't wait to chat with you next week here at the Coaches Panel. Good luck, friend.